Good afternoon. Today I'm going to be reviewing the Wolbrook Pan4Timer Automatic. This watch is available from Wolbrook.com for €489. So firstly, let's look at the watch case that the watch comes in, and then I'll talk you through the specifications of the piece. So the watch comes in a watch case which is housed inside this outer cardboard box. On the front of the box we have a Wolbrook sticker, and this indicates that it is maintained clean. What that means is the watch has passed quality control inspection. So to clarify, Wolbrook are the parent company of three watch brands, Wolbrook, Douglas and HDP respectively, and you'll notice the similarity between the watch boxes, watch cases and accessories between the aforementioned brands because they are all made by the same factory and assembled in France. The quality control takes place in France, as does the regulation of the calibers. So this has passed quality control inspection. This is the watch case. So it's made from fabric, which is cotton, rather like denim weave, and as you can see, good attention to detail because we have the Wolbrook emblem which is embroidered, also the embossed Wolbrook logo into the strap, and the strap secures the flap, as you can see, and inside we have this piece of cardboard which details instructions for exchanging the President style bracelet if you want to exchange it for a strap. Also has the website wolbrook.com, and on the reverse there's additional instructions. The purpose of this profile piece of cardboard is it goes in between the case back and the bracelet clasp, and it prevents the bracelet clasp from rubbing against the case back, scuffing and scratching it in shipping. So good attention to detail. Good quality weave to the denim woven fabric, very aesthetically pleasing green tone to it, and the edge of it is upholstered with genuine leather and matching stitching to it. So it's a good quality canvas and leather watch case, as you can see. So immediately one gets the impression that this Wolbrook Pan4Timer Automatic is a high quality French made piece. The glass items that come with the piece, it comes with this certificate of authenticity and warranty card. Also has the hashtag for their social media, Pioneers in Command. On the reverse, it thanks you for your purchase, details the website, wolbrook.com. Also gives a direct link to the owner's instruction manual, my.wolbrook.com. So as an alternative to a plastic or cardboard card with a QR code, which can be scanned with an Android or iPhone, alternatively a printed owner's instruction manual booklet, they simply have a website address, my.wolbrook.com, and you can download the owner's instruction manual online. Also details the reference number of the piece, the retailer, wolbrook.com, and the date of purchase. Now, this watch is covered by a 3-year international warranty, and I want to give due credit to Wolbrook here because often low-tier pieces between €0 and €500 are only covered by a 12-month international warranty. Mid-tier pieces between €500 and €5,000 are usually covered with a 2-year international warranty. It is very unusual to see a low-tier piece at €489 price point with a 3-year international warranty. It does add value to the piece, and Wolbrook deserve full credit for that. And one also gets this card leaflet which you fold out, and this has a high definition image of a vintage Wolbrook advertisement, and on the reverse it has the different case back designs that Wolbrook use on their various models, and again we have the hashtag for their social media, hashtag Pioneers in Command. And lastly, one also gets this embroidered Wolbrook tag. As you can see, it says Pan4Timer, Paris, Wolbrook, and on the reverse it says Skin Diving Tool Watches since 1949, Wolbrook.com. So with regards to the specifications of the piece, we have a 40mm case diameter, we have a lug-to-lug measurement of 48mm, a thickness of 13.5mm, and a lug width of 20mm. The President style bracelet tapers from 20mm at the lugs down to 16mm at the 2-button push clasp. So we have the perfection personified 20 to 16 taper, which is perfect for a 40mm head of the piece. 2-button push clasp is solid mil 316L grade stainless steel. Ribs in it are very aesthetically pleasing, and it is embossed with a Wolbrook W emblem. Now, you'll notice the similarity between this bracelet and clasp and other HDP and Douglas pieces which I've previously reviewed. And as I've detailed, the reason for that is Wolbrook is the parent company of the three brands, Wolbrook, HDP and Douglas respectively. They also own the bracelet manufacturer, which is NSA. So inside, if you look at the left-hand portion, you can see there is a high-definition emblem engraved, which is the NSA emblem. NSA made bracelets in Switzerland in the 1960s and 1970s for a plethora of watch brands such as Heuer and also Doxa. And although the bracelets and clasps were branded with Doxa and Heuer respectively, they were actually made by NSA in Switzerland. And then the brand died out in the 1990s, and the brand has since been acquired by Wolbrook and it has been resurrected. So that's the reason why Douglas, HGP and Wolbrook watches are fitted with Wolbrook bracelets and clasp, NSA bracelets and clasps respectively. So with regards to this specification, we have a boxed top hat double dome sapphire crystal with clear AR coating, and the clear anti-reflective coating does an outstanding job of reducing the glare and the highly reflective nature of the glossy black enamel dial and the cap to the Canon pinion. So boxed top hat double dome sapphire crystal does give the piece a vintage aesthetic, rather like an acrylic, plexiglass or Hesalite domed crystal, which was used in the 1960s or 1970s. So it does give the piece a vintage aesthetic, albeit it does have the modern day contemporary benefits of being harder and more scratch resistant, and also the benefits of AR coating, which improves the legibility. Now, with regards to dial execution, it's a date complication piece. Just bear with me, I'll move the minutes hand out of the way of the date at 4 so you can see it better. Right, so date complication at 4, and we have a roulette date wheel. So roulette means the Arabic numerals alternate between black and red. This is very aesthetically pleasing because the roulette Arabic numerals contrast very well with the white date wheel. Both the red and the black Arabic numerals are high definition and crisp. The font is clear and it's very legible. And I think more watch brands should use roulette date wheels. They were used by Rolex on the Datejust, for example, but often white date wheels simply have black Arabic numerals. Red actually contrasts very well and it does add interest to the piece. Now, as you can see, this piece is unique in that it doesn't have an hour hand, and unlike a GMT piece with a second hour hand for the second time zone, this displays 4 consecutive time zones at the same time. So as an alternative to an hour hand mounted on the Canon pinion, what we actually have here is a clear plastic disc, and on the disc there are 4 colour-coded triangles, as you can see, red, orange, green and blue respectively, and they match the different colour tones of the anodised bezel, red, orange, green and blue respectively. So we have different cities around the world on the rotating bezel, and then we have 4 triangle hour markers for 4 consecutive time zones. So they display the 4 time zones at the same time. Now, I'll unscrew the crown and I'll show you how it works. So you can use this 2 ways. The bezel has the chapter ring has minute ticks around the dial, which is normal. And then outside of that, we have a 24-hour chapter ring, as you can see, which has the 24-hour Arabic numerals, 1300 hours, 1400 hours, 1500 hours, etc. So that can be used for a second time zone. Now, we also have a rotating bezel with the anodised cities, which are colour-coded, red, orange, green and blue respectively, and they match the colour-coded triangles, red, orange, green and blue. So the 4 time zones can be set either via the triangles on the clear plastic disc or alternatively via rotating the bezel. So rather than having an hour hand, what happens is when you pull out the crown to the time setting position, you can see the 4 colour-coded triangles rotate both clockwise and anti-clockwise. Rather like a GMT hour hand rotates on a GMT piece, independently of the 12-hour hands, these 4 triangles, which are colour-coded for the 4 different time zones, they display consecutively, so at the same time rather than independently. And as you can see, both clockwise and anti-clockwise, you can set each of the colour-coded triangles. So for example, if you want to set the time zone for London, you can rotate the red triangle. London is here, red. I'll bring it up to 12 o'clock to make it easy for you to read. Just bear with me. So, London is anodised red on the bezel. It's now at the 12 o'clock position. And what one can do is rotate the red triangle of the 4 triangles or 4 time zones to London. This is now the correct time for London, 12 o'clock. And as you can see, the other colour-coded triangles, orange, green and blue respectively, now point at the other cities, Paris, Helsinki and Moscow. So this will now display the correct time for London, the correct time for Paris, the correct time for Helsinki, the correct time for Moscow simultaneously, not independently. The 4 time zones are displayed consecutively, and that's how it works. And it's surprisingly intuitive because it does take some getting used to, but once you become accustomed to looking for the red triangle, you can align it with the red city on the bezel, which is London, the orange city for Paris, the green city for Helsinki, the blue city for Moscow. So you can align the colour-coded triangle with the respective colour-coded portion on the bezel. And it does actually become very intuitive to read the 4 time zones consecutively for London, Paris, Helsinki, Moscow, and so on. Works very well. And it's a much simpler way of displaying 4 time zones consecutively rather than having 24 time zones. For example, 24 cities, which would be very confusing to keep track of simultaneously or consecutively. So it actually works very well. This is the first time I've seen this, and it's something very different to a GMT piece with a second time zone displaying a 12-hour and 24-hour time zone respectively, simultaneously or consecutively, with a GMT hour hand and a GMT bezel. For example, we're all familiar with a GMT bezel, such as a Pepsi bezel, with a blue portion and a red portion representing day and night hours, the 12 hours plus 12 hours of daylight and night time. This is different because we have the cities around the world, but they're colour-coded with 4 colours. Very simple to keep track of because we have red, orange, blue and green. And therefore there's no confusion because one looks at the colour-coded triangle and matches it to the colour-coded portion of the anodised bezel. Works very well. So that's simply how it works. Very intuitive, hence the name Pan4Timer, because it displays 4 consecutive time zones at the same time. So let's test the bezel execution. So solid 316L grade stainless steel bezel, coin edge finished. The coin edge teeth are mirror polished. Large chamfer, which is mirror polished, that deletes the sharp edge of the coin edge teeth. It's low profile, which gives the piece a vintage aesthetic. The coin edge bezel is high definition, visually aesthetically pleasing, but also very grippy and tactile. It's easy to get good purchase on with one's index finger and thumb. As I've detailed, the bezel is anodised aluminium, and now subjectively one can be critical of the use of aluminium because of course it's not as hard and scratch resistant as a ceramic bezel insert, alternatively a sapphire bezel insert respectively. However, one has to be magnanimous here because with these colour coded different cities using the red, orange, green and blue colours, it would be impossible to make this from ceramic. And of course then engrave it with high definition engraving with the respective cities such as London, Paris, Helsinki, Moscow and so on. So aluminium is actually the correct choice because they have been able to print the silver cities and also the hour ticks with high definition printing. They've also been able to anodise the 4 different colours, red, orange, green and blue respectively, to a high quality level. So the metallic silver reflective finish of the letters for the cities and also the hour ticks is clearly legible because they contrast very well with the metallic anodised colour tones of red, orange, green and blue respectively. So the anodising is good. It would not be possible to make this from ceramic to this standard. It would not be possible to make this from sapphire crystal to the same standard, colour-coded with 4 different colours. So aluminium is therefore the correct choice. Now, of course, it's not as hard and scratch resistant as I've detailed, but the benefit is it is very aesthetically pleasing because the 4 different colours of the anodising are very eye-catching and the legibility is good, the clarity is good, and the fonts used for the capital Arial fonts for the cities is clear. It's easy to read. So the functionality and the legibility therefore is optimised. So they've made the correct choice. Also, it gives the piece a vintage aesthetic, rather like a 1960s or 1970s piece. So I like the vintage aesthetic. Now, as an alternative to a loom pip at 12 o'clock as per a dive bezel, what we actually have is we have 3 different loom pips. So we have one loom pip which is a triangle, one loom pip which is a circle, and one loom pip which is a square. So there are 3 different loom pips, and the reason why they've used 3 different shapes rather than just one circle dot or loom pip at 12 o'clock is because this represents so many different time zones. It helps with identifying the time zone you're looking at. For example, we are looking at 4 consecutive time zones, hence the name Pan4Timer. And what they've done is they've broken up the bezel portions into the 4 different time zones. So to break it up, we've got a triangle, we've got a circle, and we've got a square. And in between each of the loom pips in the different shapes, square, triangle, and circle, we have 4 different time zones. So for example, Tokyo, Brisbane, London, Paris are in between the square loom pip and the triangle loom pip. And then in between the triangle and the circle, we have Helsinki, Moscow, Bangkok, and Denver. Helsinki, Moscow, France, and Denver respectively, and then it's broken up by a dot. And then we have Chicago, New York, Bangkok, and Beijing between the dot or the circle and the square. This actually works very well. and it's intuitive because one quickly becomes accustomed to looking in between the square and the triangle, or the triangle and the circle, or the circle and the square respectively, because we have those three lume pips in different shapes, and in between each of the three lume pips we have the 4 different cities around the world. So you can quickly identify which of the triangle shapes, which are color coded on the clear plastic disc on the dial, align with which of the colour-coded cities, the 4 different cities in between the lume pips. So it works very well. 3 lume pips on the bezel, 4 cities in between each of the lume pips, and therefore we have 12 cities in total around the world. This works very well. Legibility is good, clarity is good. Now with regards to dial execution, glossy black enamel dial is high definition. I like the white minute ticks of the chaptering. I like the large Arabic numerals for 12 and 6 respectively, and the large printed indices, which are C3 superluminova. The 4 colour-coded triangles for the different time zones are also loomed with C3, which we'll test in the lume test. Quality of the black minute ticks on the 24-hour chaptering are high definition crisp, and we've got a black triangle which denotes the 24th hour. So this is excellent legibility. And what we have here is a date complication piece with 4 consecutive time zone displayed, plus the 24-hour chaptering, plus a 60-minute tick chaptering. So there's a lot of information here, but the legibility is well displayed. The clarity is good, and also I like it's all easy to read. Beneath the 6 Arabic numeral on the dial, we have France, because to remind you, Wolbrook, Douglas and HGP pieces are all produced in France. They are assembled in France. The regulation of the calibers takes place in France. The quality control inspection takes place in France. So they're right to print France on the dial, and they are proud that this piece is assembled in France, not China, which again adds value to the piece because it has higher quality control inspection procedures. So let's test the bezel execution. 120 click unidirectional bezel, as one would expect. Now, as I've detailed, it's low profile and coin edge, therefore it gives the piece a vintage aesthetic, but it is very grippy and tactile. It's easy to get good purchase on the bezel with one's index finger and thumb, rather like a dive bezel. 120 clicks, rather like a dive bezel. Nice and tight. It's got a firm resistance, similar to a Steinhardt Ocean 139, albeit not as stiff. The Steinhardt Ocean 139 is too stiff. I regard it as too firm. This feels heavier than a Seiko 5KX. It feels heavier than a Rolex Submariner date, such as my Starbucks, and it feels heavier than a San Martin SN017G. To put it into perspective, heavier than a Steel Dive SD 1953, which you may be familiar with. Nice firm resistance. The benefit is no lateral side-to-side play, no back play whatsoever. It feels nice and tight, so it feels exactly the same as a 120 click unidirectional bezel, which are used on Wolbrook skin diver pieces, such as the ones I've previously reviewed. So exactly the same. Nice loud audible clicks. One can hear and feel the click spring beneath the bezel engaging in the 120 grooves machined into the underside of the solid stainless steel coin edge bezel. Excellent. Now let's check the alignments. So one can align the triangle lume pip perfectly with a black triangle on the 24-hour chaptering, as you can see, bang on the centre. Let's check the alignment of the dot lume pip or circle dot. Next click. Perfect. The circle lume pip aligns perfectly with the black triangle on the 24-hour inner chaptering. Finally, let's check the square lume pip, the third and final one. One more click. Perfect. So the diamond shape or square shaped lume pip, the third lume pip, aligns correctly, bang on the centre of the black triangle on the inner 24-hour chapter ring. So all 3 bezels, square, circle and triangle respectively, they align correctly, bang on the centre. This is the benefit of Wolbrook pieces being assembled in France, not China. They have a higher quality control inspection procedure. So to remind you and clarify, HGP, Wolbrook and Douglas watches all have these quality control stickers which says maintain clean, and this indicates it has passed quality control inspection and therefore it is sterile, therefore it says maintain clean, keep the watch maintained clean. And this is good because it indicates that their quality control is rigorous, and that's what you're paying for with the Wolbrook, HGP and Douglas piece. The assembly is in France, the regulation of the calibers in France, and also the quality control. And one can see the benefits here because this is perfect bezel execution. Feels tight, no lateral side-to-side play, it's firm resistance, feels even through the 360 degrees of rotation, doesn't get heavier or lighter. The alignment is bang on the centre with the square, circle and triangle 3 lume pips. This is fantastic. It is firmer than a 5KX bezel, and it is firmer than a Rolex Submariner dates bezel, and also firmer than an SN017G and an SD1953. But I like it because it's not sloppy. It doesn't have back play, it doesn't have side to side lateral play, and the alignment is bang on the centre every single time. So let's test the screw down crown execution. Solid 316L grade stainless steel crown. Matte satin finish to it. Coin edge teeth have a large chamfer which deletes the sharp tips of the coin edge teeth, and it is embossed with a Wolbrook W emblem in a circle. So, correctly proportioned. It's large enough to be grippy and tactile, easy to get good purchase on with one's index finger and thumb. So let's test the execution. Silky smooth. This is sublime screw down crown execution. Perfect interface between the internal thread of the stainless steel crown and the external thread of the stainless steel crown tube. This is fantastic. It's something that Wolbrook, Douglas and HGP do very well. Their screw down crowns are always silky smooth. I've reviewed a plethora of HGP, a plethora of Douglas and plethora of Wolbrook pieces, and they all have sublime screw down crown execution. So when it's fully unscrewed, one can manually wind the Miyota caliber 8315 automatic to its maximum 60-hour power reserve. So to clarify, the 8315 is the successor to the 8215. The 8215 had 42 hours of power reserve. The 8315 is upgraded. It has 60 hours. Now, to clarify, there is a notable difference. The 8215 has the same architecture, albeit 42 hours, and it needs 40 clockwise turns when the mainspring is fully unwound and it is exhausted and the movement is static and it's stopped dead. So the 8215 needs 40 clockwise turns to manually wind it to 42 hours, its maximum. This 8315 is 60 hours. Now, I'm pleased to report it doesn't need 60 clockwise turns, which of course would be laborious. How many turns does it need? 51 clockwise turns will suffice. So when the mainspring is fully unwound and the movement has stopped dead, it's static and exhausted, 51 clockwise turns will fully manually wind a caliber 8315 to its maximum 60 hours. So one gets the benefits. The 8215 has 42 hours. This 8315 has a beneficial 60 hours of power reserve, but it doesn't need 60 turns. 51 will suffice. Feels smooth. The architecture is the same between the 8215 and 8315, therefore there's no discernible difference. When manually winding both calibers, they feel exactly the same. Feels very light. So one can feel the tension in the mainspring gradually building up to its maximum 60 hours. Feels lighter than an NH35A, NH38A, and it feels lighter than an SW200-1, which you may be familiar with. It does feel smooth. I like the smoothness of it. Now, to clarify, it's not as refined and smooth as a 9015 or 9039, which are premium 9000 grade calibers. The 8215 and 8315 are a level below that, and therefore, of course, they lack the refinement. They don't have the smoothness. But it does feel smoother than a PT5000, which feels rough, feels gritty, feels too stiff. It does feel smoother than an NH35A. It feels lighter. That's the point I'm making. So, it feels pleasant to manually wind, feels lighter than an NH35A. Pulling it out to the second click position is the quick set date complication. So, one can now see the roulette date wheel at 4 o'clock. Alternates between red and black, hence the name roulette, rather like a roulette wheel. And I like it. I like the red Arabic numerals, both the single and the doubles, and I also like the contrast of the black Arabic numerals, both the single and the doubles. This adds interest to it because the roulette date wheel was popular in vintage pieces in the 1960s and 1970s, and of course Rolex also used it in the Datejust. And I think more brands should use roulette date wheels, and also more brands should use red Arabic numerals on a white date wheel versus the default option of black. Both the singles and the doubles align correctly. They're not too far to the left or the right of the date window, and they're not too high or too low. The alignment is bang on the centre, and they've done a very good job. And again, this indicates the high level of quality control of Wolbrook pieces because they're assembled in France and the quality control takes place in France. So, excellent. Roulette date wheel adds interest, very aesthetically pleasing. The font is high definition and crisp, both of the red and the black Arabic numerals on the roulette date wheel, and it is very aesthetically pleasing, but the legibility is good. The benefit of it being at 4 o'clock versus the default position of 3 and 6 o'clock is that the symmetry of the dial is retained because we have the perfect balance of the large 12 Arabic numerals at 12 and the large 6 Arabic numeral at 6. And the other large our printed indices have good symmetry. So strictly speaking, it's an asymmetrical dial because we have a date complication at 4, but the actual indices and the Arabic numerals for 12 and 6 are balanced. That's the point I'm making. So it's a symmetrical dial layout. Legibility is therefore enhanced, and of course it looks like a balanced dial. Had they put the date window at 6, they would have had to delete the 6 Arabic numeral, and if they put it at the 3 o'clock position, of course they'd have to delete the printed index, and of course that would reduce the balance of the dial. This looks very aesthetically pleasing and the legibility is good. Putting it out to the second click position hacks the movement, and if you look at the fully loomed second hand, you can see it's now stopped dead, and therefore it's possible to set the time precisely to the second with a Miyota caliber 8315 automatic. So we're now in the time setting position, and as I've detailed, or as I've demonstrated, rather than having an hour hand mounted on the Canon pinion, what we have is a clear plastic disc. And the clear plastic disc has the 4 colour-coded triangles, which are loomed with C3 Superluminova in red, orange, green and blue respectively. Now, in terms of smoothness, there is no discernible difference. This clear plastic disc with the 4 colour-coded triangles rotates both clockwise and anti-clockwise. It feels the same as rotating an hour hand with an 8315, which has a minute, second and hour hand respectively mounted on the Canon pinion. What I like about it is, and this is unique, it's the first time I've seen this, because it has this clear plastic rotating disc, the 4 colour-coded triangles appear to float above the dial. And one cannot see the clear disc rotating, one can simply see the triangles only. So it actually visually looks like the triangles are floating above the dial when they move around to display the 4 consecutive time zones. And I like it. Now, in terms of backplay, it feels exactly the same as a standard Miyota caliber 8315 with an hour hand mounted on the Canon pinion. There is some backplay in it, that's the reality of it. In terms of backplay, when one rotates the coin edge crown clockwise and anti-clockwise, there is some backplay in the minute hand, and it's the same amount of backplay one gets with an 8215, the same amount of backplay one gets with an 8315 with an hour hand, rather than this clear plastic disc with the 4 triangles. So it's not more or less backplay, it's the same. It does have more backplay than an NH35A or an NH38A, which you'll be familiar with. Also does have more backplay than a 9015, 9039 and the SW200-1. That is just a characteristic of the 8315 and a characteristic of its predecessor, the 8215 respectively. And it's something one has to just become accustomed to. I don't regard it as detrimental. There is actually a mechanical reason for it, a technical reason, which I'll reiterate for the benefit of those of you that have not heard it. I often detail this in my previous reviews. The reason why minute hands have backplay when one rotates the crown, there's a necessity for it. Because if the winding gears mesh perfectly, if the teeth of the gears had no clearance, if they mesh perfectly with perfect tolerances, the problem with that is when one presses in the crown and the winding stem re-enters the caliber, it would cause the winding gears to jump out of position, either clockwise or anti-clockwise, and that would have the effect of making the minute hand jump out of position clockwise or anti-clockwise rather than remaining static as it should do. So what they do is to prevent the minute hand jumping out of position when the winding stem enters a caliber is they machine some clearance or some tolerances between the teeth of the winding gears, and therefore when the winding stem enters the caliber, the slack in the teeth of the gears or the clearance between the teeth, it prevents the winding gears jumping and it prevents them moving clockwise or anti-clockwise, and therefore the minute hand remains static, which is beneficial. That's the reason for it. However, with better quality calibers, the amount of backplay, the amount of clearance between the teeth on the winding gears can be minimalised. So for example, on an SW200-1 there is less backplay, on a 9015 there is less backplay, they are higher quality. With an 8215 and 8315, the backplay is more. That's the negative, and it is more than an NH35A and an NH38A. And that's something one just has to live with. That's just the way it is. But what I like about it is the smoothness. It doesn't feel stiff like a PT5000 hour hand. It doesn't feel rough or gritty. When one rotates the crown and the minute hand moves around through the 12 hours, or in this case 4 time zones with the triangles, they feel very smooth. Feels just like rotating an hour hand. So it doesn't have additional friction because of this clear disc with the 4 triangles. It feels exactly the same as setting the time with an hour hand. And I really like the way they float above the dial. One cannot see the clear disc. It just looks like the 4 triangles are floating when they're moving clockwise and anti-clockwise around the dial to set the 4 consecutive time zones. So very pleasant to use, albeit it does have more backplay as I've detailed. Pushing the crown back in, it's got a nice positive click and that restarts the calibre. You can see the fully loomed second hand begins to sweep around the dial at the characteristic 3 Hz sweep. Now this is something I dislike. You'll know this from my previous reviews. From an aesthetic perspective, I dislike the stutter or judder of a 3 Hz sweep running at 21,600 vibrations per hour as per the 8215, 8315, NH35A and NH38A respectively. I prefer a 4 Hz sweep running at 28,800 vibrations per hour as used on the 9015, 9039 and SW200-1 for example, because 4 Hz has a nice smooth sweep. 3 Hz stutters or judders, it just doesn't look as aesthetically pleasing. From a technical perspective, I also prefer 4 Hz to 3 Hz because it's the perfect balance, the perfect compromise between power reserve and accuracy. When one extends the power reserve, so to clarify, for example, this is based upon the 8215. The 8315 is the successor with the same architecture, but they increased the power reserve from 42 to 60 hours. Now, 3 Hz is therefore particularly suitable because when one extends the power reserve of a calibre, 3 Hz is good for that. However, the accuracy is sacrificed. That's the negative. Often, to refine accuracy, one has to sacrifice power reserve. So 4 Hz gives the perfect balance or the perfect compromise between power reserve and accuracy. For example, a movement can have a higher power reserve of 65 hours, but still retain cost chronometer limits of -4 to +6, for example. The 8215 and 8315 both run at 3 Hz. They have second-hand stutters or judders, but the benefit of this calibre is it does have 60 hours and it has the same accuracy of -20 to +40 as its predecessor, the 8215. But I would prefer if it had 4 Hz, that's the point, just from an aesthetic perspective and also the balance perspective. But works well. Setting the time works well of the 4 consecutive time zones displayed. Hacking works well. Quick set date complication works well. So let's test screwing the crown back down. Immediate thread pickup. There's a perfect interface between the internal thread of the stainless steel crown and the external thread of the stainless steel crown tube. This is stellar screw down crown execution. I really like it, and Wolbrook deserve credit. It's something they do very well across their 3 brands, Wolbrook, Douglas and HGP respectively. Right, so let's look at the bracelet in detail. So President style bracelet as an alternative to the default options of beads of rice, Jubilee style, oyster style or flat link style. President style bracelet has brush satin finishing, which is beautiful, perfection personified taper, correct decision of female Poutilene link. So let's check the articulation. Female Poutilene link articulates freely, doesn't feel stiff or kink, that's the benefit. Doesn't have excess longitudinal, lateral, side, up and down play. Articulates freely, doesn't feel stiff or kink, it's fluid, that's the benefit. Beautiful lustre to it, credit where credit's due. The lustre on this has nice fine grained satin finishing to the top side, underside and flanks. What I like about it is they have matched the case finishing with the bracelet finishing, and what I'm referring to here is the flanks of the case and the flanks of the bracelet. This is a fundamental that many low tier and mid tier brands and micro brands get incorrect. There's a clash. For example, they'll mirror polish the flanks of the case, but then they'll brush satin finish the flanks of the bracelets, therefore they don't match. Alternatively, they will brush satin finish the flanks of the head of the piece and mirror polish the flanks of the bracelet. So again, there's a clash. What we have here is continuity of finishing because the brush satin finishing on the flanks of the head of the piece match the brush satin finishing to the flanks of the President style bracelet. President style links have nice profiling and they add some meat to it, so this is good because the bracelet has enough heft to it to balance the 40mm head of the piece and balance the clasp. So articulates freely, doesn't feel stiff or kink, but no sharp edges to the top edge or the lower edge of the flanks, so doesn't scratch the wrist, doesn't pull arm hairs, but doesn't rattle, doesn't have excess longitudinal, lateral, side, up and down play. That's the benefit of this being well finished and the quality control inspection taking place in France and the assembly taking place in France versus China. However, there is one negative subjectively. This uses push pins rather than screw pins, and they are split pins versus pins and collars. So to clarify, pins and collars are used by Grand Seiko. They are better than split pins. Split pins are the least expensive option in order to reduce production costs per piece and therefore maximise profit margin per piece. I prefer to see Wolbrook upgrade this to 1.2mm screw pins because that would tighten up the tolerances, and of course they are more durable. The other benefit is they could tighten up the tolerances further and this would refine the bracelet. And as I've detailed, this bracelet and clasp is made by NSA, and Wolbrook are the parent company of NSA. But nonetheless, I'd like to see this upgraded from split pins to screw pins. But however, one has to be magnanimous here because this is a low tier piece. Now we are at the upper end of low tier, 0 to 500, because it's €489 respectively. Really, I'd like to see screw pins at this price point. That's the negative I want you to be aware of. But let's check the other side for continuity. Again, female P10 link articulates freely, doesn't feel stiff or kink, that's the benefit. Doesn't have excess longitudinal, lateral, side, up and down play. Bracelet articulates freely, doesn't feel stiff or kink, it's fluid, no sharp edge to the top edge or the lower edge of the flanks, doesn't pull arm hairs, feels comfortable, doesn't scratch the wrist, beautiful luster to the top side, underside and flanks. Very aesthetically pleasing. Let's look at the clasp in detail. So, as I've detailed, this is made by NSA, parent company is Wolbrook, and it's the same style as used on HGP and Douglas pieces such as their skin divers, which I've previously reviewed, albeit this does have the Wolbrook emblem versus the NSA emblem, which is used on HGP and Douglas pieces. But same design, we've got the ribs, which are very aesthetically pleasing, and the bevels are brushed satin finish versus being mirror polished. 5 micro adjustment holes in the flanks. Does give the piece a vintage aesthetic. Now, I'm not going to be critical of this because this piece clearly has a vintage aesthetic. Yes, it would be better if it had a solid milled micro adjustment clasp with internal ratcheting mechanism, but however, one has to appreciate the vintage aesthetic of this piece. The Pan4Timer has 4 consecutive time zones, anodized bezel, and clearly a vintage aesthetic to it with a President style bracelet. So this milled clasp actually does match the President style bracelet and the vintage aesthetic of the piece, rather like a 1960s or 1970s Wolbrook piece. So it is acceptable to have 5 micro adjustment holes in the flanks versus a micro adjustment clasp for the vintage aesthetic. Brushed satin finishing is good. Curvature is good. No sharp edges to the undercuts to the flanks, no sharp edge to the top edge or the lower edge. 4 corners have been deburred, so it's a well finished clasp. 2 button push triggers are brushed satin finished, heavily sprung loaded so they feel reliable and robust. Internals are solid mill 316L grade stainless steel, flawless brushed satin finishing to the top side, underside and flanks, no sharp edges to the top edge or the lower edge of the flanks, no sharp corners to the centre section. And I'm pleased to see steel inox 316L, which denotes stainless steel 316L grade, is engraved with high definition engraving, and most importantly it's the correct way up, it's not upside down. Also on the left hand side we have the NSA emblem engraved with high definition engraving. It's well finished, good curvature to it. Let's check the hinge pins. Left hand hinge pin articulates freely, doesn't feel stiff or kink, doesn't have excess play. Centre hinge pin articulates freely, doesn't feel stiff or kink, doesn't have excess play. Finally right hand hinge pin, which is actually a spring bar, doesn't have excess play, articulates freely. So all 3 hinge pins, left hand, centre, right hand hinge pins, are friction interference fits. Closes freely, snaps shut with a nice positive click. Excellent, good quality finishing. Let's look at the case back in detail. So, solid 316L grade stainless steel case back, concentric CNC lathe tool machined. It's a dodecagon case back. What does that mean? The dodecagon means that it's 10-sided as rather than an octagonal case back which has 8 sides. The dodecagon is well finished. The flats of the 10 sides are deburred very well. Satin finish to it around the circumference, and the centre is concentric CNC lathe tool machined, which refracts the light rather than reflecting it as per a mirror polished case back. It's engraved with Pan4Timer and also the 4 triangles for the 4 consecutive time zones with high definition engraving, as well as the specification, reference number, serial number of the piece, and assembled in France. Fantastic finishing. The engraving is high definition and crisp, but it's not rough, it doesn't feel sharp. The benefit of that is this case back feels smooth, it doesn't feel rough, doesn't scratch the wrist, it doesn't feel abrasive. It's very well finished, and what I like about it is it's very low profile. One has to remember this is powered by a Miyota 8315, and of course it's a thicker caliber than the 9015 for example, but it doesn't have a deep bubble back case back, although it does provide 150 metres of hermetic seal. Wolbrook deserve credit here because they could have just used a pressed on case back, alternatively a screw down case back with only 50 metres or 100 metres. We're not looking at a dive piece here, it doesn't need 200 metres of hermetic seal. 150 is strong specification for a daily wear piece. So they deserve credit, and also it's very low profile. This is the kind of flat, low-profile caseback one would expect with a 100-metre piece, but this is 150. So quality of the finishing is excellent. Underside to the head of the piece is concentric CNC lathe tool machine to a good standard. Four tips of the lugs have bevels that deletes the sharp edges, and what I like about it is it has pierced lugs. This gives the piece a vintage aesthetic because we have holes in the flanks. The other benefit is this means one can easily depress the spring bar externally using a spring bar tool through the holes in the flanks of the pierced lugs, and when one has standard stainless steel spring bars, this makes it easy to exchange a strap or bracelet. But what we're looking at here is the correct decision, because although it has pierced lugs to give it a vintage aesthetic, we have quick release stainless steel spring bars versus standard stainless steel spring bars, therefore that negates the need for a spring bar tool. Excellent. Female pitted end links are a nice tight fit to the head of the piece. Undercuts to the flanks of the head of the piece are well finished. No sharp edges because they have large bevels which deletes the sharp edges on the transitions. So case finishing is excellent, case back finishing is excellent, end link finishing is excellent, and I'm pleased to see quick release stainless steel spring bars. So I'll give you a wrist shot now, just bear with me. I'll remove my Concord 40. Now I haven't sized the bracelet, although it is on position 4 out of 5 on the micro adjustment holes on the flank, so it's not on its absolute maximum, but I'm pleased to report it does come with a very long bracelet, and I can easily slide 2 fingers beneath the bracelet and clasp at all times. Now I regard this as excessive because you can see even with 2 fingers beneath it, it's still very loose. There's too many links. They do not need to have so many links. Even I would remove 4 to 6 links from this bracelet for my large 8-inch wrist. It's far too long. Wolbrook, Douglas and HGP do this on all their President style bracelets and also their Beads of Rice style bracelets, which are made by NSA, because they're meant to fit around wetsuits. Their dive pieces, such as their skin divers made by HGP, Douglas and Wolbrook, they always have long bracelets to fit around a wetsuit even if you have a large 8-inch wrist size, but this is excessive as you can see. They could delete 6 links from this and it would still fit the majority of collectors with a 6 to 8-inch wrist size. The majority of collectors have a 6 to 7.5-inch wrist size. One doesn't need a bracelet to fit 9 inches plus. But to clarify, there are enough removable links on the 6 o'clock side and the 12 o'clock side of the bracelet to size this down to a minimum 6-inch wrist size up to a maximum 9-inch plus, as you can see. And the benefit of push pins versus screw pins is it makes resizing the bracelet easy with a bracelet resizing tool. That's the benefit. Alternatively, one can use a push pin, punch and a mallet. Perfection Personified Taper is the correct decision. As you can see, beautiful luster to the President style bracelet. It feels smooth. When it moves up and down the wrist, it doesn't pull arm hairs and it doesn't scratch the wrist because the the top and the low edge of the flanks, they don't have any sharp edges. So it feels comfortable, doesn't feel sharp, doesn't pull arm hairs. Perfection Personified Taper looks good, also feels good. Bracelet is very heavy because it does have thicker links than the Jubilee style or Oyster style or flat link bracelet or Bees of Rice style, but it does look very aesthetically pleasing. It balances the 40mm head of the piece very well. So this does not feel like a top heavy piece. I like the case shape. It's rather like a tonneau case shape, and the fit of the female pitted end links is excellent. This is the correct decision rather than using male end links because you can see the benefits. Look how snug the end link in the President style bracelet pulls to the wrist. This is rather like a female pitted end link in a Oyster style bracelet because unlike a male end link, it doesn't have a large gap beneath the end link in the bracelet and the tip of the lug curves around the wrist very well. This is rather like the curvature of a tonneau case, and I'm pleased to see female pitted end links because regardless of wrist size, 6 to 7 or 7 to 8-inch wrist size, this will give you a snug fit. So it's a low profile piece at 13.5. And as you can see, the box top hat crystal does look very aesthetically pleasing with the fillet edge versus a flat beveled edge as per a flat sapphire crystal. Visually it does look like a vintage piece from the 1960s or 1970s because we've got the low profile coin edge bezel with large mirror polished bevel. Anodized bezel insert gives this a vintage aesthetic, and of course the box top hat crystal looks like an acrylic crystal used in the 1960s or 1970s. Fantastic legibility. The benefit of the box top hat crystal being double domed versus single domed, it's not flat on the underside, so one doesn't get the characteristic distortion and magnification effect as per a single domed crystal. It's curved on the underside, curved on the top side. That reduces the magnification and distortion effect when one tilts the piece at an oblique angle. Glossy black enamel dial is clearly legible. Clarity of the clear disc for the triangles for the 4 consecutive time zones is stellar. So the legibility of this piece is fantastic. Symmetry is good, even though it's an asymmetrical dial with a date complication. The black minute ticks on the white 24-hour chapter ring are clearly legible. I like everything about it. Great looking piece. Now, lug to lug is perfection. 48mm. You'll know this from my previous reviews. I often refer to 48mm as the sweet spot because 48 is the industry standard for good reason. It is the perfect lug to lug measurement for all wrist sizes, 6 to 7 and 7 to 8 inches respectively. 48 cannot be beaten for a 40mm case. 48 lug to lug is perfect, 20mm lug width is perfect. 40mm case gives good wrist presence, gives a feeling of quality, gives a feeling of heft without being top heavy and uncomfortable to wear for long periods of time, such as 8 to 12 hours per day. So the proportions of this Pan4Timer case are fantastic, and of course we have the perfection personified 20 to 16 taper. Fantastic proportions. Now, it's slightly thick at 13.5, but only marginally. It's only 0.5mm above the perfect sweet spot that's often referred to. 13mm is the perfect thickness for a piece, 13 or below. The reason is because 13 or below will easily slip underneath a shirt cuff if you wear business shirts. At 13.5, it's just 0.5mm above the perfect sweet spot, so you are still going to be able to slip this underneath a shirt cuff. Therefore, it's a practical daily wear piece. Looks good, feels balanced. Comfort level and feel good factor are fantastic with this piece. I really like the different colour tones of the anodizing. The different colours are clearly legible with these silver cities, but the point I'm making is the orange, green, blue and green, orange, green, blue and reds. They are very aesthetically pleasing. I like the metallic tone, the way it catches the light. It's just a unique looking piece with the 4 different time zones displayed consecutively, the 4 triangles which are coloured on the disc, and also the 4 corresponding colours of the anodized bezel. Looks fantastic. Vintage aesthetic, modern day specification, 4 time zones displayed, plus a date complication. Just a great looking piece. So I really like it. It's something different, and in terms of proportions, fantastic. 48 by 40, 20mm lug width, and only 0.5mm above the sweet spots at 13.5. They deserve credit for getting the proportions done to perfection. Right, so let's do a loom test. I'm just going to put back on my Concord 40, and then I'll continue. So as always, I'm going to use my 100 UV LED torch to charge it up to the absolute peak. So as I've detailed, this has C3 Super Nova, which has an aesthetically pleasing green tone in daylight, and there's a perfect colour tone match between the 3 loom pips on the aluminium bezel inserts, the 12 and 6 Arabic numerals and the printed indices, as well as the 4 colour-coded triangles for the consecutive time zones on the clear disc. Right, so that's now fully charged, and as you can see, it has not disappointed. So we've actually got BGW9 for the loom pips, which is a surprise because I thought they were going to use C3 Super Nova on the bezel. So some collectors will like this. I would prefer if they used the same C3 Super Nova on the bezel for the 3 loom pips, the triangle, circle and square respectively, but this is subjective. I appreciate some collectors will like the contrast of BGW9 used for the loom pips on the bezel. But on a positive note, good even application of the C3. So we've got C3 Super Nova for the 12 and 6 Arabic numerals. We've also got C3 on the 4 colour-coded triangles for the 4 consecutive time zones and the printed indices. So good symmetry to the dial. Nice even application. I like that they fully looms the second hand, as you can see. This adds interest, but also is good for legibility. The minute hand is skeletonized, but they've lined the perimeter of it with C3, as you can see, and that works very well because you can see legibility is good. One can immediately identify the different triangles. Now, what I like about the triangles, if you look, they're not just color coded in daylight, the different colors, but they've also outlined the triangles, but also they have different lines across them. So for example, we have a dot, we have a triangle without anything in the center of it, then we have a line across one triangle, and then we have a V in one of the triangles. And this is good because in the dark you can see the difference between the different triangles, so they don't just look all the same. Now in daylight they're obviously different colors, but in the dark you can't see that. But if you look at the different triangles, you can see they've actually got different lines or details such as a dot, line across, a V and nothing inside. And this means one can easily read the different triangles in the dark. They're different in daylight and also in the dark. And I like that they've made the solid second hand fully loomed, which looks different to the minute hand, which is skeletonized. So one can identify the skeletonized minute hand and differentiate it between the solid second hand. So there's no confusion because they are a similar length. So that's good. Legibility is good. I would just prefer if the 3 loom pips, the square, triangle and circle on the aluminium bezel insert, if they had made them C3 so they glow green. The green is good because the C3 Superlume Nova does look like tritium, which was used in the 1960s and 1970s, and clearly this piece, the Pan4Timer, is meant to have a vintage aesthetic, rather like a 1960s or 1970s piece. So I think green is the correct choice versus using blue BGW9 on the dial and hands. Although I would prefer green C3 on the bezel, but as I've detailed, this is subjective. Some collectors might like the contrast of the triangle, square and circle loom pips on the bezel being different colour. It comes down to your personal taste. But legibility is good. Potency of the exciter is okay. I say okay. I think what we're looking at here is 3 to 4 layers on the dial and 3 to 4 layers on the triangles and the hands. I think they could add an additional 1 to 2 layers because this doesn't look like a full 5 to 6. Potency of the exciter is okay, but it's not stellar. I think they could add an extra 1 to 2 layers to make it stellar. That's the point, because longevity is okay, but it's not stellar performance. And I'd like to see better, because Wolbrook can do it. I've seen it on HDP and Douglas skin divers, which I've previously reviewed. They do have 5 to 6 layers. And this one just doesn't seem to have the same potency to the exciter, doesn't seem to have the same longevity to the C3 as other Wolbrook, Douglas and HDP pieces I've reviewed. As you can see, it's okay, but I think there's room for improvement. Now, the loom pips on the bezel insert, they are excellent. They're good enough, but of course they're BGW9, so they have greater potency to the exciter. But I think the Arabic numerals, 12 and 6, the printed indices and the triangles on the clear disc, they need an additional 1 to 2 layers. That's the point. It's okay, but I think there's room for improvement. As you can see, the camera's struggling to autofocus on it because they fade quicker than expected. I'll just try one more time. There we can see. But the legibility is good, symmetry is good, and this is the benefit of the date complication being at 4 o'clock versus the default position of 3 or 6 respectively. Excellent. Right, so let's discuss the movement used because it's my favourite aspect of the piece. So, as I've detailed, this is powered by the Miyota Caliber 8315 automatic, which is made in Japan. The 8315 is the successor to the 8215, as I've detailed. So the architecture is the same. To remind you, the 8215 has an incredibly long production life. It is Miyota's longest produced caliber. Miyota have produced the 8215 since 1977, so its reliability is proven beyond question. The architecture is therefore well proven. The 8315, its successor, is based upon the 8215. It has the same well-proven architecture since 1977. The only notable difference is they have increased the power reserve. The 8215 had 42 hours. The 8315, its successor, used in this piece, has 60 hours. So one gets the benefit of the additional power reserve. But other than that, they are identical. Date complication works well, quick set complication. And we also have the clear disc with the 4 triangles for the 4 consecutive time zones as an alternative to an hour hand. It has 21 joules, it runs at 21,600 vibrations per hour and a frequency of 3 Hz. Hand winding and hacking works well, as I've demonstrated. 60-hour power reserve is beneficial, which is better than the 42 hours provided by the 8215. Stated accuracy is -20 to +40 seconds per day, so rather wide accuracy range. However, I'm pleased to report that Wolbrook are doing a good job of regulating the 8315s they're using in 5 positions. This one is running consistently at +6 seconds per day. +6 is well within the stated -20 to +40 seconds per day. It's actually within chronometer limits of -4 to +6, so that is excellent. +6 chronometer accuracy plus the benefit of 60 hours of power reserve. Now, 51 clockwise turns, that's the only negative that I want you to be mindful of, as I've detailed to remind you. The 8215 needs 40 clockwise turns to fully manually wind it to 42 hours. This 8315 has 60 hours of power reserve, therefore it needs more clockwise turns, it needs 51. That's something to note, it's more laborious to manually wind. There is one other negative to it, and the same applies to the 8215 as the 8315, the noisy rotor. When one shakes the piece on wrist, one can hear the rotor spinning round, and this is just a characteristic of Miyota 8000 series calibers such as the 8215 and 8315, the noisy rotor. The rotor is unidirectional winding, so what does that mean? Well, the rotor has to spin anti-clockwise in order to automatically wind it via the rotor. When the rotor spins clockwise, it has negligible winding effect. So subjectively one could say, well, it's a negative because it doesn't have bidirectional winding. The rotor doesn't wind the movement when it spins clockwise and anti-clockwise. It only winds it when it spins anti-clockwise. Therefore, it's not as efficient. That's the point. However, the main negative is that it makes a sound. You can hear it. It's audible. To put it into perspective, the rotor is more noisy, it's more loud, more audible than a Miyota 9000 series such as the 9015 and 9039, which are premium grade. It's more noisy than an NH35A, it's more noisy than an NH38A, more noisy than an SW200-1, which you may be familiar with. That's something one just has to live with an 8000 series caliber such as the 8215 and this 8315. You can hear the rotor when wearing it on wrist. That's just the way it is. So that's something to be aware of. But really that's the only negative. The 51 clockwise turns to manually wind it to 60 hours is one, and the second negative is the noisy rotor. But the reliability is the benefit because it's well proven. Proven beyond question. Build quality, quality control, materials and finishing are excellent, albeit not as refined as the 9000 series, such as the 9015 and 9039 respectively. So that's something to note. But 60 hours is beneficial, and I'm pleased to see they didn't use the 8215, which would have had 42 hours. I would prefer this to be powered by a 9015, because that's a thinner caliber. The benefit is they could reduce the thickness of this piece, therefore down from 13.5 down to 13. So that would be beneficial for feel-good factor and comfort level. And of course, yes, it would have less power reserve. It would have 42 versus 60, but the 9015 has a quieter rotor. That's the point. So that would be beneficial. And of course, it only needs 40 clockwise turns versus 51. So that's an additional benefit. So I think the 9015 would be a better choice for this. But subjectively, some collectors might like the benefit of 60 hours versus the 42 of the 8215. So one has to weigh up these two things. Which is more important to you, quiet rotor or noisy rotor versus 42 hours versus 60? One has to weigh up the two things. It's a good choice because of the 60 hours and the reliability. That's the point. +6 is excellent accuracy, 60 hours is beneficial. So last I'll summarise the piece. What do I think of it overall? Well, when I'm considering reviewing a watch on my channel, the watch should meet two criteria. It should be both excellent quality and excellent value at the respective price point. So low tier piece, low tier is €0 to €500. We are at the upper end of low tier, 489. There is one other benefit to this piece which I haven't detailed, and I'm going to discuss it now because it is an additional benefit which factors into the quality and value proposition. This piece features hexaplex shock resistant architecture. So what does that mean? What is hexaplex shock resistant architecture? Well, the movement is fitted inside a movement ring, and then the movement ring is mounted on 3D rubber shock absorbers, and the movement ring is therefore isolated from the case. Normally with an 8315 it's mounted into a movement ring which is made from stainless steel, and then that's then screwed into the case and secured by 3 tabs with 3 flathead screws. The problem with that design or that architecture is when the case suffers impact damage, the shock is transmitted through the case into the movements via the movement ring, which is stainless steel. And then of course that knocks out the regulation of the caliber. That's the negative. But this is good because it has hexaplex shock resistant architecture. So the 3D rubber shock absorbers isolate the movement ring around the movement from the case. So for example, if this case suffers impact damage, the shock hits the case, but the shock wave doesn't travel through the case, through the movement ring, into the movement, knocking out the calibration. The rubber shock absorbers isolate the movement from the case. Effectively, the movement floats inside the case. So this is beneficial because this is a shock resistant piece. Hence on the dial at 6 it says shock resistant, as well as the water resistance rating 150 meters. They are right to be proud of this because hexaplex shock resistant architecture is generally seen on mid-tier pieces made by Wolbrook, Douglas and HGP at the €500+ level. This is low tier, albeit at the top end, it's 489. But nonetheless, it's very impressive to see a shock-resistant movement like this, or hexaplex shock-resistant architecture used on a low-tier piece. Other brands are not doing it, and that does add value to the piece. It's something I want you to be aware of. It's shock resistance, and it's beneficial. It does actually work. So one has to factor that in. So I'm going to declare its excellent quality, and I'm going to declare the value as good. I'm not going to declare the value as excellent, because in order for it to be excellent value, it would need to have a lower price point, simply for the movement used, because it uses the 8315 versus the 9015. If Wolbrook upgraded the movement from the 8315 to the 9015, yes, then I would upgrade it from good value to excellence, because of course it would be excellent quality and excellent value if this were €489 powered by the 9015 with the hexaplex shock resistant architecture. So I like it. I like the 60 hours of power reserve, but personally I prefer to see the 9015, and of course one would also get the benefit of the smooth sweep of the second hand at 4Hz versus the stutter or judder, but that's an aesthetic reason rather than technical. So excellent quality, good value. I'm going to highly recommend it to you for your consideration. I hope you've enjoyed my review of the Wolbrook Pan4Timer Automatic. Please feel free to post your own comments below the video. Thank you for watching.